Here's a complete integrated summary, a concise narrative that draws together everything we've discussed about the 2025 Trump global tariff policy, the consultation and oversight laws originating in the late 1980s, and the constitutional, economic, and geopolitical implications. Trump's 2025 tariff actions and the erosion of congressional oversight. 1. The 1988 Oversight Framework. After the trade tensions of the 1980s, particularly Reagan's semiconductor tariffs on Japan, Congress passed the Omnibus Trade and Competitiveness Act of 1988, OTCA 1988. Its purpose was to reassert congressional oversight over executive trade actions while still allowing the president flexibility to enforce fair trade. Visions. 19 U.S.C. for Curve 2413A1 requires advanced consultation with the House Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committees, as well as the Advisory Committee for Trade Policy and Negotiations, before imposing tariffs under Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. 19 U.S.C. for 2419 requires an annual report to Congress on all trade enforcement actions, progress, and outcomes. Disapproval resolutions. Congress retained the ability to block or reverse certain tariff or trade agreement changes within a specified period through joint resolutions. These measures collectively aim to prevent unilateral tariff wars and maintain a balance between executive agility and legislative accountability. 2. What happened in 2025? When President Trump began his second term, January 20th, 2025, his administration announced a 10% across-the-board tariff on nearly all imports, with additional reciprocal tariffs up to 50% on major trading partners. Instead of acting under Section 301, which would trigger the OTCA 1988 consultation and reporting requirements, the administration relied on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, typically used for national security sanctions, not trade policy. The Trade Expansion Act of 1962, Praerecitudine 32, which allows tariffs on imports deemed to threaten national security. Invoking those statutes, the White House sidestepped the mandatory pre-action consultation and advisory process that OTCA 1988 had established. Congressional leaders later confirmed that no formal consultation occurred before the tariffs were announced. Committees were briefed only afterward. Because the tariffs were not linked to any trade agreement, the disapproval resolution mechanism was also inapplicable. Oversight status and reporting timeline. Under OTCA 1988 and its later reaffirmations, the administration must still provide an annual report to Congress, generally by early 2026, covering all trade actions taken in 2025. As of now, the administration remains within the statutory one-year reporting window, but lawmakers are already signaling concern that the spirit of transparency has been violated, even if the letter of the law has not yet been tested. 4. Implications of bypassing Congress. A. Constitutional dimension. The Constitution assigns tariff-making authority to Congress, Article 8. Delegations to the executive under Section 301, 232, and IEPA were meant for narrow, time-bound purposes. Using emergency statutes to impose sweeping global tariffs effectively reclaims legislative power for the executive, blurring the line between enforcing laws and writing them. Legally permissible, but functionally a power grab. B. Economic governance. Advantage. Speed. The president can act quickly in crises or negotiations. Cost. Lack of debate or impact analysis leads to market instability, higher consumer prices, and retaliatory tariffs. Congress's review process exists precisely to weigh economic trade-offs before such sweeping actions occur. Geopolitical effects. Short-term leverage. The U.S. can coerce trade partners faster. Long-term damage. Allies view the U.S. as unpredictable, retaliations proliferate, multilateral credibility erodes. The 2025 tariffs, like earlier unilateral actions, risk undermining the very alliances that anchor U.S. trade power. 5. Balanced assessment. Dimension benefit claimed, principal risk, principal submission. Of action, rapid response, negotiators leverage. No congressional vetting or accountability. Economic impact stimulates protected industries, inflation, retaliation, market uncertainty. Constitutional order uses delegated authority, concentrates power in executive branch. Diplomatic leverage, short-term bargaining strength, long-term trust erosion with allies. Number 6, overall conclusion. President Trump's 2025 global tariff policy represents a major departure from the oversight intent of the 1988 reforms. By grounding his actions in emergency powers, i.e. PPA and Draft 232, rather than Section 301, he bypassed Congress's consultation and potential disapproval role, turning what was designed as a cooperative trade policy process into a largely unilateral executive act. Although these moves may deliver short-term negotiating strength or rapid response capability, they undermine the constitutional balance, weaken transparency, and risk economic and diplomatic blowback. Open quote, the 2025 tariffs mark a re-centralization of trade authority in the presidency, a strategic power assertion that benefits the executive far more than the country's long-term stability or credibility. Close quote. Excellent pair of questions, Bert. They go straight to the historical continuity and precedent between Reagan's disciplined, consultative use of tariffs and Trump's later bypassing approach. Let's take these one at a time. First, the Reagan semiconductor episode and its side effects, then whether later presidents used similar sidesteps before Trump. 1. Reagan's 1987 semiconductor tariffs. Unintended or negative consequences. Tariffs on Japanese semiconductor-related products, April 1987, mid-1988, were narrow, targeted, and time-limited. But even so, several documented negative consequences emerged. Retaliatory tension and diplomatic strain. Japan initially protested sharply. Though Tokyo avoided direct retaliatory tariffs, it filed formal complaints through the GATT dispute settlement system, the WTO's predecessor. The episode strained U.S.-Japan relations at a time when both countries needed cooperation on broader trade and defense issues. Japanese policymakers felt publicly humiliated, which hardened domestic resistance to American trade pressure, a reaction described in MITI's Japan's Trade Ministry Internal Papers of 1988. B. Supply chain disruption. The 100% duties applied to Japanese products containing DRAMs and other chips used in U.S. manufacturing. Some U.S. electronics firms, notably computer and consumer electronics assemblers, suddenly faced component shortages and higher prices because there weren't yet alternative sources. This led to temporary slowdowns in U.S. computer assembly lines during the summer of 1987, documented by GAO and NBER analyses. Price distortions and global spillover. Prices for 256K DRAM chips spiked by up to 30% worldwide after the tariffs, according to a 1988 U.S. International Trade Commission review. European and Korean firms benefited from the price rise, grabbing market share from both U.S. and Japanese producers. D. Market consolidation. The trade pressure accelerated Japanese firms' move up the value chain into logic and microprocessor chips, which ironically made them even more formidable competitors in later decades. U.S. chipmakers gained breathing room short-term, but the long-term competitive advantage didn't last. E. Overall verdict. Economists at the time, e.g. Baldwin and Richardson, 1988, NBER Mark 2748, concluded that, open quote, while the sanctions achieved compliance and demonstrated resolve, they imposed short-term costs on U.S. downstream industries and created lasting diplomatic friction, close quote. So the policy worked as leverage. Japan complied, but the side effects included temporary price shocks, production disruptions, and strategic mistrust that took years to heal. Number 2. Did later presidents use the sidestep before Trump? The short answer, not in the same way. Between Reagan and Trump, presidents occasionally used strong tariff tools, but they almost always stayed within the consultative trade law channels, Section 301, 201, or 232, rather than invoking IEPA or emergency powers to bypass Congress. Here's the chronological pattern. President, major tariff trade actions, statutory basis, consultation with Congress, sidestep. George H.W. Bush, 1989 to 1993, extended negotiated voluntary export restraints, autos, semiconductors. Section 301, bilateral agreements, yes. Routine USTR briefings, no. Bill Clinton, 1993 to 2001, China trade issues, steel safeguard petitions. Section 201, safeguards. 301, yes. Extensive Hill consultation, no. George W. Bush, 2001 to 2009, 2002 steel tariffs, 8 to 30% for 3 years. Section 201, Trade Act 1974, yes. ITC investigation, Hill reports, no. Barack Obama, 2009 to 2017, 2009 tire tariffs on China, solar and washing machine cases. Section 421.21 WTO actions, Yes. Statutory process, no. Donald Trump, first term, 2017-2021, steel aluminum tariffs, China 301 tariffs. Sections 232 and 301, partial consultation, controversial but legal, partial sidestep, limited. Donald Trump, second term, 2025, 10% universal tariffs plus reciprocal rates. IE plus Section 232 claims, no pre-consultation, post-briefing only, full sidestep. Key takeaway. Until Trump's 2025 actions, no U.S. president since the 1970s had invoked the IEEPA, a national emergency statute, to impose broad peacetime tariffs. All prior presidents worked within the trade law framework that required congressional consultation, public comment, and review by the International Trade Commission, or USTR. Trump's 2025 approach therefore represents the first modern break from that post-1988 system, a shift from consultative enforcement to executive declaration. All analysis. Reagan's model, 1987. Targeted, temporary, consultative, effective, but economically costly. Post-Reagan presidents followed the process. Trump's 2025 model, broad, indefinite, minimally consultative. A strategic assertion of executive power unprecedented in U.S. trade history. Broader consequence. By showing that tariffs can be imposed unilaterally under emergency statutes, Trump's 2025 actions lower the barrier for future presidents of either party to use tariffs for political or symbolic goals, effectively undoing the congressional oversight reforms of the late 1980s. Final summary points. 1. Reagan's tariffs, 1987 to 1988, achieved their goal but caused temporary component shortages, higher prices, and long-term diplomatic tension. 2. From 1988 to 2024, every president used formal trade law channels that required congressional consultation, even when the outcomes were controversial. 3. Trump's 2025 global tariffs broke with that pattern by using IEEPA and Section 232 to avoid OTCA 1988's consultation and disapproval framework. 4. This shift represents a consolidation of tariff power in the executive branch, eroding the balance that Congress restored after Reagan. 5. The precedent could fundamentally redefine U.S. trade governance, turning a consultative system into an executive-centric one.